Welcome to this presentation on indirect slavery. My name is Paul Ross. Aren't we facing a culminating, exponentiating perfect storm of socio-econo-enviro catastrophes? The socio, financial disempowerment, i.e. poverty of which one subset is homelessness. Social disempowerment, i.e. stigmatisation and subsequently official harassment, particularly towards our unemployed. Both financial and social disempowerment catalyse mental illness, escapism, including suicide, domestic violence, etc. The econo, unemployment and underemployment. An ingrown economy that increasingly fails to exclusively produce and deliver the goods and services we desire. That is, it has become increasingly perverted by our desire to both create jobs and to fix or manage all the other problems, such that at least half of our economy is unnecessary. The enviro, the natural environment, including global warming, plastics in our waterways, habitat destruction, and the population plague. The international environment, particularly authoritarian illegitimates such as Xi Jinping and the Taliban. So, what do we want? If we had three wishes, we could use one each for our socio, econo and enviro problems, or we could just ask for universal, sustainable stability, prosperity, maximisation. So, how can we achieve this vision? The universal, sustainable stability, prosperity, maximisation vision is achieved via the mission of maximising individuals' nationally contributive self-actualisation. Thus, the mission involves maximising that which Maslow identified as an individual's natural goal on both a nationwide and nationally contributive basis. And a prerequisite for this mission is Universal Empowerment Infrastructure, UEI. More shortly. So, how have we responded? Can't it be summed up as band-aiding? That is, haven't we been treating each C problem separately as if they are each causes? For instance, regarding the socio, we've tried to solve it with more social housing and mental health professionals. Regarding the econo, more jobs, 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 which may be referred to as Triple J politics. Regarding the enviro, 2050 carbon emission targets and sailing warships through the South China Sea. However, what if they are all just symptoms of a single supreme cause, which may be termed the mother of all our culminating, exponentiating perfect storm of socio-econo-enviro catastrophes? But what could this supreme cause be? Here we coin what we believe to be a new term, indirect slavery. Indirect slavery is the conditionalisation of receiving one's survival income. And while one's first impression of the term indirect slavery may be that it is a trivialisation of direct slavery, we are not so sure. First, it is noted both indirect and direct slaves may, in theory, depending on their treatment, personalities and precise circumstances, have reasonably fulfilling, self-actualising lives. Indirect slavery, vis-a-vis direct slavery, is an infinitely more insidious form of disempowerment. Until now, it hasn't even been conceptualised, which explains the prevailing belief that our socio-econo-enviro problems are complex, which, bringing the presentation full circle, explains why we invest so utterly in band-aiding. 2, with direct slavery, at least someone takes responsibility, i.e. the slave owner, and it is usually in their interest to provide some care. However, in the case of indirect slavery, the onus is entirely on the slave. Indirect slavery is far more widespread, i.e. globally it still affects well in excess of 90% of humans. While direct slaves know they are disempowered, in many cases, indirect slaves don't, which for instance leads to the egalitarian contradiction. In the West, for example, while we often consider our legal system to be egalitarian, on the one hand, it allows some to something for nothing inherit billions, yet on the other, produces indirect slavery. So, rather than being trivial, indirect slavery is akin to a nuclear detonation. That is, analogous to the initial explosion, it directly harms individuals. Secondly, similar to radiation fallout, it corrodes the nation's DNA such as to indirectly prevent it becoming a fully fledged society. That is, it blocks it from becoming a community where everyone is nationally contributively self-actualizing. In the comparatively empowered and wealthy West, indirect slavery is by far the predominant form of disempowerment. In Australia, while statistics regarding homelessness are sparse, which of itself is reflective of a civilisational deficit, according to Homelessness Australia, the chronically homeless have a life expectancy of around 45 to 47, and for women, it may be even lower. Indirect slavery is the main reason Australia's Indigenous have almost a 10-year lower life expectancy and are at least 10 times more likely to be incarcerated, which, though a national source of shame, until now has also erroneously been regarded as complex. Regarding indirect slavery's indirect nationalistic effects. Due to an indirect slave's unnecessary suffering, indirect slavery forces them to prioritise themselves and their loved ones above their country. Hence, understandably, most indirect slaves, at least partially, substitute nationally contributive self-actualisation with self-protective self-actualisation, which, once again circularising this presentation, has supermassive Socio-Econo-Enviro effects. This includes magnifying escapism, such as drug and alcohol abuse, crime, and relegating the environment. It also explains the general distrust and disrespect, including the penchant for many to, given the opportunity, rip others off. So, having discussed indirect slavery's nature, the question then becomes, where and how was it conceived? Modern indirect slavery emanated from the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution was characterised by community daily life merging to become national daily life. In this way, subsistence farmers who had direct control over their survival needs were encouraged off their farms to become factory machinists. Thus, unpaid work was replaced with paid work, which was compensated with money income, which, having two potential components, survival income and luxury income, could indirectly be used to respectively purchase survival needs and, if sufficient, luxury desires. Initially, machinists' families still occupied the farms, which meant if necessary they could go home. We've seen similar in, for example, India over the COVID crisis when everything was shut down in the cities. A lot of people went home to their family farms. However, over generations, they and their families lost their farms and their subsistence farming skills. This particularly happened, of course, in the West. In this way, our ancestors lost control of their direct access to their survival needs, such that there manifested indirect slavery. So, how can indirect slavery be solved? Indirect slavery is solved by implementing the Universal Survival Income, USI, which is also known as the UBI. Ideally, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the USI should have been implemented as part of a new government citizen compact or covenant. However, there was no such narrative, so it didn't happen. The USI should be substituted for universal minimum hourly wages, How? This is crucial. Substituting the USI for universal minimum hourly wages provides something for everyone, including eradicating unemployment, which though rarely articulated, is solely caused by How. Regarding the unemployed, they are defined as those who want paid work at the going wage rate, yet are unable to get it. Thus, the USI is a push eradicator, i.e. it eradicates poverty, unemployment, stigma and harassment. Push. Secondly, it decreases regulation, which libertarian allied also unleashes business. Third, it is self-funding, i.e. rather than being one-way welfare, it is two-way infrastructure, which counterintuitively generating resources strengthens the government budget, allowing much lower taxes. Very unfortunately, in our experience, this alternate infrastructural paradigm is typically massively difficult for human minds to grasp. Nevertheless, rather than being like a magic pudding, it is akin to universal education. Returning to the Industrial Revolution, via it invoking a transition from community to nation, suddenly there was a nature-driven requirement for universal empowerment infrastructure, which consists of 5 cornerstones: universal rule of law, universal liberal democracy, universal healthcare, universal education, and the universal survival income, or USI. Please note, first, the lack of any one cornerstone compromises stability, which means authoritarian illegitimates can credibly claim, as they are doing, that the West system is flawed. Secondly, all 5 cornerstones are interrelated, such that the absence of one detracts from the integrity of each of the others. For example, no matter the quality of teaching, if students suffer poverty-induced family dysfunction, universal education will be non-optimal. Thirdly, rather than being costly one-way welfare band-aids, all UEI cornerstones are two-way self-funding investments. The UEI constitutes no less than Fukuyama's fabled notion of an end-of-history model, and therefore it is the antidote to Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. This has massive implications, including, to take a contemporary example, the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan only occurred because the West exported a compromised model. The Afghan people's greatest complaints against their former government were corruption, incompetence, and a lack of security. Yet the USI bypasses both corruption and incompetence because the money goes directly to the individual without the involvement of go-betweens. While the presenter has never visited Afghanistan, he has worked in Iraq, where there may be some similarities. To a typical subsistence Muslim Afghan farmer living in a small village, while democracy and girls' schooling may be important, demonstrably it wasn't enough. However, if they and everyone they knew had been guaranteed a survival income of just $10 to $20 a month, it may well have been enough. As stated, the absence of one UEI cornerstone subtracts from all the others. Consider this. For nothing sustainable, apparently, the USA alone spent in excess of $2.26 trillion. Yet, with Afghanistan's adults numbering around 20 million, the USI, which in any case is self-funding, at $20 USD a month would require an investment of only $4.8 billion per year. Regarding Afghanistan, it was often said, there's no military solution, only a political one. However, perhaps the solution was full UEI governance. So what about the implications for countries such as South Africa, Lebanon, Cambodia, and Venezuela? Regarding the universal empowerment infrastructure's development, since the Industrial Revolution, despite the lack of a UEI narrative, let alone a government-citizen covenant, in the West, all 5 cornerstones have, to a greater or lesser extent, evolved, with the very notable exception of the USI. So, Rather than development of the UEI taking place on the basis of a grand overarching narrative, it has via struggle bottom-up evolved. For instance, particularly in 18th century USA and France, democracy via the struggle of the masses evolved. Regarding the lingering problem of racism, by countries fully implementing the UEI, particularly the USI, it will predominantly be alleviated as much of it results from an insidious downward spiralling conflation with disempowerment. Another notable point, of the Western countries, the USA possesses the weakest UEI, which explains why it's the one most heaving apart. Regarding the USI's failure to evolve, this is because it is being jointly blocked by an informal and unholy alliance between two otherwise conflicting forces. From the left, the how sentimentalists, who apparently don't realise the USI is a self-funding, exploitation eradicating and prosperity unleashing upgrade. From the right, the something for somethingists, who, as well as also failing to grasp its benefits, including to business, in addition, don't realise all inheritance, which has myriad forms including our culture, institutions, environment, etc., is something for nothing, and the USI is justifiable as an industrial revolution inheritance. Lastly, we will consider what effect the USI as a solution against indirect slavery will have on each of the Socio-Econo-Enviro partitions. So, regarding the socio, poverty is eradicated. 2. Social judgment, including most official forms of stigmatisation and harassment, are also eradicated. Given poverty and social judgment are the parents of most mental illness, escapism, suicide, domestic violence, etc., the rest becomes manageable. Thus, it does appear to be a solution to most of our socio problems. Regarding the econo, with universal minimum hourly wages eradicated, unemployment, underemployment is eradicated, which means jobs, or triple J politics is also eradicated, i.e. there's no focus or no need to focus on creating jobs for jobs' sake paid work, which in turn means we will return the economy to being efficient, i.e. to exclusively producing and delivering the goods and services we desire rather than being a means to put people into paid work. The current perversion means that though our potential productivity per person is around 10,000 times that of just prior to the Industrial Revolution, and more than twice that of 2010, most of the potential benefit is wasted. Other benefits include eradicating the welfare to work distortion. This is the disincentive for people to come off welfare and enter paid work because they lose that welfare. In the case of the USI, this doesn't occur. All but eradicating the manufactured mess paid work. The point is there is no longer a mess to fix, and much lower taxes. Regarding the enviro, with the natural environment, instead of being forced to prioritise obtaining one's survival income, which trains the mind to be selfish and materialistic, one can prioritise the environment. Secondly, wastage and inefficiency, including by eradicating jobs for jobs' sake paid work and manage the manufactured mess paid work, are minimised. Thirdly, social status will become dependent not on materialism but on societal contribution. Lastly, regarding the international environment, when citizens of authoritarian illegitimate countries witness other countries with 5 cornerstone universal empowerment infrastructure, which is therefore inclusive of the USI, they will demand it for themselves, which will decisively undermine those regimes. Just before we wrap up, 2 asides. First, if at the time of the Industrial Revolution the USI had been relatively immediately implemented, then Marx wouldn't have seen indirect slavery's offspring, namely exploitation, which means he wouldn't have written the Communist Manifesto, which in turn means the entire world, our late 19th, 20th and current centuries' histories would be vastly different. For instance, as well as no Cold War, there would be no Red China, which means, among other things, no lab leak. Secondly, our global population would be closer to its 1804 level of 1 billion because its post-industrial revolution exponential growth is predominantly due to subsistence farmers requiring large families for monopolised cheap labour and old age security. Concluding, our culminating, exponentiating perfect storm of socio-econo-enviro catastrophes are entirely self-inflicted. This is tremendous news because, assuming it isn't already too late and provided we are sufficiently earnest, it means we can solve it. The solution is the 5 cornerstone UEI, particularly the universal survival income. The USI will, together with the other UEI cornerstones, solve formalised disempowerment, including indirect slavery, which will thereby also solve disempowerment symptoms, i.e. our C catastrophes, to the point they become manageable. Lastly, this presentation provides the basis for a new philosophy called civilizationism, which will be outlined in a future presentation. Thank you very much.